Well, hello and welcome back to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint, and excited to have you here joining us again, as always. We have a really fun, I think, show in store for you today, something a little different from what we usually do. And as it's the end of the year, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we have coming up in the new year. As well, it's a fantastic opportunity for you to get to meet some of the amazing volunteers that we have here at the Alliance and learn a little bit more about who they are and why they're volunteering with the Alliance and why this work is important to them. So I am going to just here in a moment begin to introduce to you some of the amazing volunteers that we have. Before I do, and as we go through today, I'm going to have a few things to share with you and a few announcements to share with you as well. And I'm going to start off with one of them that is, well, I think it's really exciting. So hopefully you will as well. What I want to share with you is that we are, as we move into the next year, as we move into 2024, we actually are going to have a number of folks helping to sponsor our podcast, which is fantastic. As you know, we bring this podcast to you every 2 weeks and often even more frequently than that. And it's something that we have done and always want to do at no cost. But of course, it costs us money to produce these shows and all of the equipment and services and whatnot. So we've been looking for some sponsors to help us to cover some of the costs of this. And we have 2 sponsors that are already on board for next year, but we are looking for a few more. So, and we're really looking for, products, organizations that are aligned with our mission, our vision, and our values. So if you or anyone that might be interested in helping to sponsor our work, please let me know. I do want to let you know immediately that we have 2 that are already signed in on for next year. We have Supportable Solutions, and if you were with us our last live event, you met Connie Persick. Connie Persick is the owner of Supportable Solutions. They are an amazing company out of Wisconsin that does really educational consulting around the country. And I've been lucky enough to work with Connie pretty closely on some work that we're doing together related to a collaboration we have with Crisis Prevention Institute, which is really interesting as well. And at any rate, Supportable Solutions will be one of our sponsors over the next year. You learned about a week ago about the Why Toolkit, and you'll have an opportunity to learn more about that and more about the great work that they're doing there as well over the coming year. So one of our sponsors I wanted to introduce. The other one, who actually just joined us today, is we're going to be sponsored by Ryan and Robert Delana, who wrote this amazing book. And you may remember we did a live event with them at one point previously as well. But they did this amazing book called Without Restraint. And the book is subtitled How Skiing Saved My Son's Life. And the story really follows the story of Ryan and his experience in school, his experience being restrained and secluded, and is, in the words of the book, kind of how skiing helped to save him and how he's doing today. And they're going to be sponsoring our podcast in the coming year as well. So we're going to have some more announcements as we kind of continue on today. Letting you know some of the exciting things that we've got coming up in the next year. But let's get to some of the fun here, and let me go ahead and begin to introduce you to some of our amazing volunteers. And I'm going to bring them all up on the stage here, and we'll start by doing some introductions. I do want to ask you, if you are watching us live, you know the drill here, and I see that Pam, you've already jumped in. Let us know in the chat who you are, where you're joining us from. I hope everybody's having a great holiday season as we're getting towards the end of the year here. But please let us know who you are and where you're coming to us from today. And with that, let me go ahead and bring up some of our volunteers here today who will be joining us for the program, and we will get a chance to meet some of them and hear a little bit about them and their stories and why they're involved here. I do want to remind you that, as always, this program is being broadcast live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And of course, it's available after the fact as an audio podcast. So if you want to listen on the go, you can go to Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to podcasts. So I all of a sudden have this Brady Bunch looking group of people up here. And I don't mean that literally like Brady Bunch, but, seeing the 9 squares here, I feel like, I'm on an old time TV show here. But we've got a number, as I mentioned, a number of our volunteers that'll be joining us, others that might jump on a little later. So what I want to do is first do some introductions, and I'm going to ask everybody to first introduce themselves, and then we'll go back through and tell you a little bit about their stories and why they're involved with the Alliance. And I'm going to start here just because it's easier to have a system. And I'm going to start with Courtney for a lot of reasons. But Courtney, you are next in the line here in more ways than one. Courtney, of course, is my amazing assistant here at the Alliance, who has been doing a lot of work to support the work that we've been doing here. Courtney and I are the only actual staff people here. We're a small organization, and Courtney helps to do a lot of things and keep us moving in the right direction. Courtney, let me go ahead and let you introduce yourself and take it away.
So my name's Courtney Litzinger, and I've been in the...
And you may still be muted there.
Okay. You hear me?
All right. Hold on. I think I can bring you back to life. How's that?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Sorry about that.
Okay.
That was not... I pressed the magic button, which unfortunately had you unable to speak, and I didn't mean to do that. So go ahead.
So my name is Courtney Litzinger, and I've been in the human service field for about 15 years. I'm a mother to 3 children. My oldest, who is autistic and has been restrained in school multiple times. So I got involved with the Alliance when my daughter started getting restrained in school, and I've been trying to advocate to end seclusion restraint in schools ever since.
Great. And we'll come back to you in a few minutes and talk a little bit more about your story if you're willing. Angie, Angie, there's a couple of great things about, introducing you. One is that you're also here in Maryland. Now, mind you, not in the same part of Maryland that I'm in, or you may not actually be in the state at the moment, because I know you're often traveling and I get to see all the amazing places you are. But let me let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Guy, and everyone. My name's Angie Vigliotti, and I have only recently been a volunteer with the Alliance, but I have known Guy for quite a while now, and the work he's been doing here. And I am a parent of several neurodiverse children and a stepchild, and I am here mostly because, and I've joined this organization mostly due to my connection to most of these people here, and to probably some of the people that are watching and listening live. And I'm here to help with some guidance, and I'll give you a lot about my story, but I try to help a lot of people in the special education program in my area, because my county is completely different than other counties in Maryland. And I have been, working under an autism waiver for the state now for quite a while. So I work with a lot of kids that have autism.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, great. And we'll come back to you in a minute, and you can tell us a little bit more about kind of, why this work is really important to you. Heather.
I couldn't find the unmute button.
You found it. You're perfect.
I'm Heather. I volunteer with the Alliance because I used to work residential, and I see a need for reaching out to schools and any place that provides services to children and give them skills, articles, and things to support the move away from restraint and seclusion.
Fantastic. And we're going to go, I feel like I need to say, into the center square. Karen, you are the center square today. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Karen Bures. I am a special education teacher in the state of Oregon. My background is also residential, and I've since moved into the educational world, and I'm currently working for a nonprofit organization. And we run an after-school program for the students in our district, providing academic support and social-emotional learning support, and then trying to continue to build skills in the schools.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to go over now to Braden.
Hi, am I audible and visible?
We can hear you. Perfect.
Awesome. Hi, everyone.
And see
I'm
you.
Braden. Sorry.
I said, and see you. We've got you both ways.
Great. I'm Braden Flax, coming to you all from Virginia. I'm a very recent addition to the Alliance, and I credit my joining the Alliance to my friend Dr. Arielle Silverman, whom you'll all be hearing from shortly. As far as in the rest of my life, I wear a lot of different hats. I am a Red Cross certified first aid CPR AED instructor, and I also serve as a community experience advisor for the Blind Muse Foundation and an executive assistant at the Safety Positive Foundation. And what brings a lot of my work together is that all of those things in one way or another have to do with making sure that people are both safe and included. And I'll say more about that later, but I want to give next person a chance.
Fantastic. Thank you. And we're going to go over to Amy.
Hi.
Hey there.
I'm Amy Kriewaldt. I'm currently in Connecticut. I'm actually from Maryland, so have that in common with a few of you. So I'm a mom of 3 autistic children. They're all pretty young, 2nd grade and kindergarten. So I have had an experience with my youngest, one of my oldest children since she was in preschool, of dealing with difficulties with keeping her safe in school. So I have a vested interest in making sure all children are safe. And I'm autistic myself, so I have a long history of wanting to ensure that children are kept safe in school. It's definitely a big problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We will move on to Arielle.
All right. If you cannot hear me, please say something. Otherwise, I will speak. Hi, everyone. My name is Arielle Silverman. I've been a volunteer with the Alliance for about 6 months now, and I am a person with a disability. I've been totally blind since birth. I also have a doctorate in social psychology from the University of Colorado Boulder, and I worked as an independent disabilities research and training consultant. I have background in research methods as well as kind of disability justice philosophies, and I worked with organizations to help them become more inclusive. I also worked for about 4.5 years with a pre-employment transition services program in Virginia for students who are blind or have low vision, including several who were autistic or who had other developmental intellectual disabilities. And I now work professionally as the director of research at the American Foundation for the Blind, in addition to volunteering with AASR and a couple other disability-focused and justice-focused organizations. And I'll share more in a bit about my story.
Sounds good. And it's great to have you here. And I don't know how you're at the very last position here, Chantelle. I mean, that just doesn't seem
good.
Right. So Chantelle, let me let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Chantelle Hyde, and I've been a volunteer with the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint for about 4 years now. I am going to get that date from you one day, Guy or Courtney. But it's been a pleasure. It's been an interesting journey. But my background is in business, and before having my daughter, adult education, and very much in supporting adults who were retraining for new jobs after being injured at work. And so accommodations and inclusiveness in an educational setting isn't new to me. But I have a 30-year-old son in Ontario, where I'm originally from, and live with my daughter and my husband in New Brunswick, Canada now. And unfortunately, had no choice but to get involved in the issue of seclusion and restraint, especially after my daughter went through some pretty traumatizing seclusion incidents, and came home with things like finger-shaped bruises on her arm. I know, Amy, you experienced that with your daughter, and it broke my heart because I've seen this. But yeah, it just, the more and more you see how widespread an issue it is, it's impossible not to try and do something about it, especially when your child goes through that. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
And
I
you've
just
definitely been doing
I'm
things about it.
lots of things over the last several years. Yeah.
All right. So tell you what, I just want to remind folks that are watching live, and I see a couple of you already have, but let us know in the chat who you are and where you're from, and I'll share that out here in a moment. Do want to mention before we kind of get on to learning a little bit more about your stories and your background, I said that kind of as we went through today that I would have some announcements, have some things to share. And right after Chantelle spoke is really a good time to bring this up. I wanted to mention to everyone that we are kicking off our 2024 book study series. And anyone that may know this already, we did a book studies series this current year, really as a trial. We wanted to try a couple of books and see how it went. And Chantelle, along with a number of other volunteers, have led those book studies and done an amazing job. And oh gosh, we did a book from Mona Della Hook, Brain Body Parenting. We did Lori Desautel's book. We did Intentional Neuroplasticity. We did a book from Joe Brummer. We did a number of books. And we really had a lot of fun, great conversations, got to meet amazing people. One of the things that we did in conjunction with the book studies is that each of the book studies lasted about we were kind of tweaking the time, 4 to 5, 6 weeks. At the end, we had the authors join us. And I do want to mention that in 2024, we already have a page up on our website about the book study program, and you'll recognize immediately the first book that we have coming up because you're lucky enough right now to be joined by the author, Dr. Arielle Silverman. We are going to be doing the first book study on Just Human, Dr. Silverman's book. That's coming up in January. We've got a book study for One Rule Improv coming up in March. We have Raising Kids with Big Baffling Behaviors by Robin Goebel coming up in September. And I Will Die on This Hill, Autistic Adults, Autism Parents, and Children Who Deserve a Better World, coming up October. That's our standard book study program. We also are going to be doing a special educator program, and this is going to be during the summer. The educator program is going to be led by educators, for educators, and that can be paraprofessionals, teachers, social workers, psychologists, whoever it may be. And in fact, I may even be hitting one of our educators that's on this call here to help out with that. So something to look forward. I won't mention any names right now. And we've got a children's book study coming up as well. We're going to, over the summer, cover a couple of children's books, ones that we would love to see in more classrooms around the country. So just wanted to mention that real quickly. And why don't I go back here and see who has said hello, and then we will start getting into, oops, lost my cursor here, start getting into some of the stories here. We've got Davina from Connecticut. I've got Aaron here. Aaron said my child has autism, ADHD, as well as PTSD and depression, anxiety, and has been restrained multiple times by the school district, resulting in further trauma. I'm a disabled special educator as well. Aaron, I'm sorry to hear what's been done to your child, and you're at a place where we want to change that and stop that from happening. We've got Sarah joining us from Rochester, New York. I've got Kim here from Michigan. My child was in seclusion during ABA. She's been traumatized by this experience. It wasn't until after I realized they had an ABA director that lied about all her training and had stolen BCBA credentials. Oh, that sounds hairy. And Aaron said, I'm located in Delaware. Forgot that part. Let's see, a few more people that have joined us. Dawn from Fargo, North Dakota. I've got somebody here from New York, and great. So, and there's Jennifer. Jennifer, I expect you to be on this end of things, but good to see you. And absolutely, we got a lot of amazing people here today. All right. Okay, Kim, New York, my child was restrained, and lots of incidences that I could not get into details about. And of course, many of us share some common experience, with restraint and seclusion, and with some of the broader issues as well. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of have some folks share a little bit more about their story, if they're willing, and really what why they decided to become part of the Alliance and help out with this work that we're trying to do here. So I'm going to kind of go around and you're welcome to share a bit. And if you want a pass, you can always have a pass as well. I don't want to put anybody in the hot seat, but I will start with somebody. I'm going to go now from back to front and now the other way around. Chantelle, let's start with you. And if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your story, why this work's really important to you, and tell us a little bit more about your experience.
Okay. Well, I can tell you that if you were to Google Chantelle and Lily in New Brunswick, you'll probably find a few links to some news stories there. And it really started out, I went on the news after years and 3 provinces in Canada trying to find the appropriate supports for my daughter, the appropriate supports in school, support with her augmentative alternative communication device, things like this, and just running into one brick wall after another and just disaster situations like being cut down to half days of school and so on. And so I went on the news to talk about the fact that I was really honestly concerned that I might not be able to care for her in a couple of years if she didn't get more support. And another mother saw that newscast and, sorry, I'm going to get emotional already, but
okay, you're fine.
Described the situation that I shook for 3 days after hearing the story. It's impossible still not to get emotional. Sorry, because I'm in a bit of a state right now. I apologize, Guy.
No worries.
But
no worries.
I've had to remove Lily from school for good. This breaks my heart. I can't imagine that we went through it again. Try and just take a breath here, because it's just unbelievable to me that after 4 years of really hardcore advocacy, bringing things to the legislative floor to get things on record about restraint and seclusion, about the fact that they would just hire anybody off the street to work with my complex needs child with zero training, guaranteed to lead to catastrophic situations. I literally, Guy, you and I spent 16 months, I believe, working with Maya, the producer of CTVW5, and went on the longest running news program in Canada to bring the issue of restraint and seclusion across Canada to light. And still, somehow, Lily ended up being locked in a room again. And it just blew my mind. And the next day, this time, when I went into the school, I found out a couple of things. Actually, Guy suggested that I view any video footage that was available, and found out that they had been walking around for an entire week with a blue folding gym mat under their arm every moment that they worked with her. And a week before, Guy, you had actually posted a video of a little boy that I couldn't even watch. It was so disgusting to me. So to see that they were carrying around a gym mat similar to that news story, I was just blown away. And also found out that the resource teacher, who was the one who was training all of her staff, didn't even know her emergency safety plan. And we spent 8 months by that point developing a minute detail by minute detail safety plan for exactly the most difficult moment that she might have at school. This day it was over PMS, to be honest, we've realized the next day. And they didn't do any of it. They didn't do anything that the OT, who was very trauma informed, had a lot of suggestions in there about what they should do. They, of course, were carrying around a blue gym mat that nobody knew about. And I don't know how we had a whole team of people that met monthly. I'm on the end of the phone, email, text message at any point in time. If somebody thinks they need a strategy for something, the OT is there. 7 hours a week she had dedicated to Lily's case, and nobody even mentioned to her or to me, that they had a staff member coming in concerned about their own safety. And if that's the case with my child, I would expect that we would have a conversation about that, as I'm sure any one of you would expect that conversations would happen around all of these things. But unfortunately, we had several levels of the school system that really kept all of this from us. So it's really scary when you start to learn that it can be that kind of a situation, that the superintendent, that the minister of education literally was getting letters from another mother for months before I found out what happened to her. how that could ever be the case. And we were living in a town of 3,600 people with one English school. So if somebody's talking about Lily at this one English school, there's only one Lily there. Like there was only one Lily at that school in that entire town. So it's impossible that we're not talking about the same child. So, it was blatant, just disregard and really hiding the situation. And I don't know if it's because they didn't want to admit that they didn't know what to do because they didn't have experience with a child as complex as Lily. But when it came down to the last situation where people just blatantly ignored her plan, then I knew that she's just not safe. She's not safe in that environment. So I'm sitting in a camper right now in Florida, and we're really just going to be traveling around Florida for the next several months, to be honest. Me trying to get into a better nervous system state because I've really ended up in a tough place this time. My trust for, people to leave my daughter with people is just gone. So it took me a long time, Guy, to get to that better place.
Right.
And, doing things like the book studies and everything, that was a big part of that, right? So I'm really excited to get back to the book studies in January. It was really amazing. Actually, even if it's just us volunteers sitting in the room in January, this will be an amazing place for me to be on a weekly basis again. It's a really positive, proactive way to go about things. We've been able to work with some really amazing educators and psychologists in the school system, and even gain some amazing volunteers as a result. So it's been an awesome experience. So I apologize for my emotional state, but I'm on a roller coaster these days after this last seclusion thing. It really, did a number.
Yeah. And of course, you've been working really hard, in New Brunswick and across Canada to try to bring about change. And you and I have kind of met with people across the country, hoping to do some things that really influence some change. And you've also immersed yourself in kind of, what are the solutions, right? I know you've been taking the courses from the Merit Center, the self-reg courses, which I know I've heard you say just really amazing things about. But you mentioned the CTV W5 news story, and of course, for those of you in the U.S., that would be kind of like 60 Minutes here in the U.S. It's a pretty large news show, and I put that link in the chat as well if anybody wants to take a look at that. But you've been doing.
Can I say, Guy, that really, I did a few things before that, which might have made it possible even for CTVW5 to, agree to even work with me at all. But the fact that came out really opened the door with the New Brunswick Child and Youth Advocate. And I do know at this point, because of the information that I brought to him and so on, we've had an effect on the new Education Act and inclusive education policy in Brunswick, which is a really big deal because there's not a large group of people in New Brunswick. It's really been you and I, Guy, that have worked really hard to, look at what should we do next, or what kind of information should we send, what types of questions should we have asked on the legislative floor. You've been a huge help to me with all of that, so I appreciate it more than you know. But it's made a difference. It has. So I can't say it's not all, sad doom and gloom. It's, doing this work. It's been really important for sure, but it has made a difference. Some of the things we've done. But I know that we
absolutely.
Still have a long way to go.
You have certainly made a huge difference. I mean, I think that the things that you've done, have made a tremendous impact locally there in New Brunswick, and I think even more across Canada. So I know these are tough things to go through. I know the pain that comes along with this and the trauma that comes along with it, but to be able to take that and to do things that are going to, I believe it's the heart of what we do here, right? It really is about, we can never erase the things that we've gone through, but if we can prevent another child from going through, another family member from going through, another parent from going through the things that we experience, I mean, it I think is worth the hard work. So, Chantelle, thank you so much for all you do, and stick around. We're gonna keep going around here. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit, and we have a community here at the Alliance that I'm really proud of, and that is that we are not just parents, we are not just self-advocates, we are educators, we are administrators, we are school psychologists, we are a lot of different people coming together that want to do better, that know we can do better. And I think that's really important. It's not just a matter of, people that have had this experience saying, no, these things are wrong, don't do them. It's a matter of coming forward with ideas and with solutions and working together. And I think that that's where we're the strongest. So I want to transition a little bit. And Karen, I want to come to you for a moment because, you're one of our educators here today. And of course, we've got a lot of educators in our community. And that's something that means a lot to me because it's through the work that you're doing, through the work that other educators in our community are doing, that really makes a difference on the ground for so many kids. So Karen, let me have you tell us, if you would, a little bit about your story, whatever you're comfortable sharing, and kind of why this is important to you.
I feel it's hard to go after you, Chantelle, because I have restrained and secluded children. And I think there's been a lot of comments in the section about like why. And so I think I want to talk about my experience and my journey. I started off in residential treatment, and I think from the ripe age of 22, was trained to seclude and restrain. Oh, sorry, did I get loud there?
Just for a second, but you're okay.
I was trained to do that. If there were any big behaviors, that was sort of that was the go-to intervention. And so I carried that with me for a very long time, that I knew it was an ugly part of the job, but it was in fact going to be a part of the job. And I didn't realize for years how desensitized I was to all of it. Because like you have to, right? Like you have to disconnect. And there was a lot of, I don't know if pride is the right word, but like I have the ability to like disconnect from the emotion of the situation to keep everybody safe. And that is that I believe that with my whole heart, and felt really conflicted at the same time emotionally. And then, so I transitioned into the world of education and into younger students than I was working with in the residential setting. And I worked in an offsite behavior program for intensive behavior. And when I got there, it felt very much like a residential treatment center. There was a lot of multiple daily large escalations, multiple seclusions, multiple restraints. And I started as a paraprofessional and felt like, when that something is kind of wrong in your gut, but you can't really articulate it yet. You don't have a voice to push back against that yet. It just, if somebody instructs you to initiate a restraint in the education system, you need to do what your administrator is telling you to do, or you're insubordinate and can be fired. And so I think it took me a very long time to really unpack that I didn't believe in what we were doing. And it was incredibly scary knowing that there could be some repercussions for me. And there was one restraint in particular. We had a student who had really just been sort of moved around from center to center to school, like nobody. He was a hard kid. He was a difficult kid for reasons that were not his fault in any way, for the trauma and the disability that he had. And I worked so hard to make a connection with him and to build a relationship with him. And there was one day where he got some pretty big feelings and he started throwing chairs around. And I was instructed to participate in a restraint with him. And I had said to my administrator, I don't think we need that. Like I was at the point of like starting to very nervously use my voice to object to things while trying to stay obedient and compliant, which is part of the education system for our kids, for our teachers, for our administrators, like all the way up. It's a system that's built on compliance. And she said, nope, this is getting very dangerous. We need to do this. And so we initiated the restraint. And I looked down at one point and he just had tears that were like coming down his face and like dripping off of him. And the look that he gave me, like I realized that I had broken something and that I had betrayed his trust. And all of the work that I had been doing with him was gone in that moment because I did something that somebody told me would keep him physically safe, but it certainly didn't keep him emotionally safe. And it was a really pivotal moment in my journey. And I vowed not to do it ever again. I won't ever do this again. And then I got the teaching position and I worked incredibly hard in building a team and building strategies. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had no, you're trained in restraint and seclusion. That's the big training. And then we went to a training called collaborative problem solving. And that was sort of a game changer for me. And so I started trying out these new strategies and researching some more strategies and trying things out and failing and trying again. And after a couple years, we built a program that we did not have restraint and seclusion as a normal intervention anymore. And we got a lot of accolades for it. And that was kind of around the same time that I stumbled upon meeting Guy. And so I started to ask him, like, how do I go about like formalizing this in some way? And so I ended up proposing to the superintendent that we adopt a new crisis prevention plan that did not have restraint and seclusion attached to it. They created a task force and I felt like we were getting somewhere. And then I started to face some retaliation. I started to face at least monthly disciplinary meetings where I was told that I was being insubordinate and I was being unprofessional. And then ultimately I was asked to sign a letter of directive saying that I would stop talking about not restraining students with disabilities or secluding them anymore. And that if I didn't stop, essentially I would be fired. And so I resigned and continued to try to find ways, right? Like I think the thing that I've reflected most on, and I recently wrote an article about this, is realizing how similar I am to the students that I serve, because their needs are not getting met, and that might be manifesting in a lot of different ways that society says are not appropriate or not safe, but it's because they don't have a voice and they're not being heard and they're not being supported. And that's also how I felt. I felt like I was told that I needed to be silent, and I just couldn't. I just didn't have it in me. Like I can't be silent about it. And so that is why I'm here. And I've found some other paths to be able to continue to support my students. But my work with the Alliance is incredibly important to me because I felt very alone in all of it. I felt like a troublemaker. I still feel a lot of shame, around not being in the district with some of my peers and my coworkers I made a comment to Guy about feeling like an imposter sometimes because I'm speaking out and I'm trying to coach other professionals, and at the same time I'm not working in the district as a teacher. That's not true. I am a teacher, but like in the school district, because I won't stop talking about it. So I appreciate this community. And when I hear stories like Chantelle's and Courtney's, and like that's why I started talking before, and it's why I'm going to continue talking, and it's why I'm going to continue to try to help other educators realize that there are different interventions and there are different tools and strategies, and they are effective and they do work, and we don't have to resort to those measures. But but it's going to take a collective sort of movement, because it's being a disruptor is not a celebrated characteristic in the education field. So,
yeah. And you know, what's interesting to me is you had made so much progress. I mean, you had essentially taken an environment where restraint, seclusion were regular occurrences and had really managed to reduce and eliminate the practices. And at one point, as I recall, the district even marched you in front of the Board of Education to talk about the great work you had done in reducing the use of restraint seclusion.
It was just the school board, not the
school board. Right. And you know, then later, of course, as you continue to push to say we can do better, we can eliminate these things, you know, faced a lot of pushback. And I get you. I mean, it's absolutely hard. It's hard to feel like you're a lone person that's trying to bring about change, but you know, you really have, you know, stuck with, I think, the things you think are important and continue to do amazing work. I'll just mention here real quickly, just because it's a good time to mention this kind of after you talking. You know, I've kind of talked about how I would keep bringing up some things that are, you know, kind of happening throughout the coming year. And one of those things is the Creating Trauma Sensitive Schools Conference. And the reason I connect that to you is that you're going to be presenting for the virtual portion of the 7th Annual Creating Trauma Sensitive Schools Conference, which is fantastic. This is a conference that is put on by the Attachment Trauma Network. It's the largest trauma-informed educators conference in the country, and really an amazing event. You know, there's so many great speakers that are going to be there this year. I think Ross Green's a keynote. Dr. Lori Desautel's is another keynote. I know Dr. Schenker is going to be speaking at the virtual event as well. I'm going to be speaking at the event in Dallas. Jennifer Abinette, another one of our volunteers, is going to be there as well. So I encourage people to check that out. And Karen, again, just want to, you know, thank you for the courage and the work that you've been doing and continue to do. It's not easy to stand up against the system. And you talked about something I talk about a lot, which is the compliance problem. This is a problem. You know, when people say, well, why does somebody do this? Why does somebody do this to a child? You know, wouldn't they just reflect and think that this is not the right thing to do? And unfortunately, I think that we're so focused on compliance throughout our education systems that people come out of you know, kind of teachers' colleges and they have their teaching degree and they get into an environment. They've not learned anything probably about restraint or seclusion or any of these things. They've not learned really enough around the neuroscience of trauma and behavior. They're coming in really not very well prepared, and they get into a situation where they're told, this is what we do when these kids are whatever might come after that. Usually it's something around the word safety. And, you know, people might initially think, well, that doesn't really feel right. But, you know, in the name of compliance, we often do things that we might not otherwise do. So Karen, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being a disruptor. Glad to have you, you know, as part of our volunteer team. I'm going to shift over for a moment to Courtney. Courtney, would you like to share a little bit about your story? I know we published a bit about your story recently as well. Do you want to share a little bit?
Sure. So my first experience with restraint and seclusion was actually right out of college. I worked for a residential treatment facility that did a lot of restraint and seclusion. So then years later, when I had a daughter who was autistic and doesn't communicate in the traditional way, she uses an AAC device, I knew that she was at risk for being restrained and secluded. So our public school actually placed her in a specialized private school. And I didn't know it at the time, but in Pennsylvania, where we live, the specialized private schools are not subject to the same laws and regulations as public schools are. So she had very little protection at all from being restrained and secluded. And at first, the school, you know, things went well. And then COVID hit. And I would say the year after COVID, or the main year we were remote for COVID, she came back, she had a different teacher. And that's when things kind of went downhill. The culture seemed to have really changed at that school. And the way they were dealing with things was just to restrain kids. So she ended up being restrained for the first time right after Halloween that year. She was restrained twice in a row. And the second time she was restrained was only for biting on like a GPS unit that she had, which wouldn't have hurt anything. So that really wasn't a good justification for restraint. And we tried, she would come home with like hand-shaped bruises, kind of like Chantelle had said. We tried turning the school into child line. That didn't help anything. She was showing a lot of signs of trauma. But unfortunately, when you have a child that doesn't communicate traditionally, a lot of times, they're not looked at as being able to be helped, I guess, with things like therapy or anything like that. So any issues she had were just, brushed off. And she went on to be restrained a couple other times for things like trying to eat snow off the ground. One point she got glitter in her eyes, so she was restrained over that. So we ended up switching schools. We would have switched sooner, but unfortunately with it being still right after COVID, no one had staff and no one was able to take her. So she's in a new school now and things have been going a lot better. But the point is, she's still in a specialized private school and things could still go bad. It was so easy. Like initially, the school she was in was fine, but then there was like a leadership change and there was a big culture shift. And because there's no laws to really protect her or any of the other kids, any of these schools could go bad at any point. So I really feel like we need to advocate for change, a higher level change, so that there are protections out there so that things like this can't happen to kids like mine. So I'm really glad that I found the Alliance.
Yeah, and we're glad to have you. And, absolutely. I mean, the fact that there's no federal law around the use of restraint and seclusion in schools across the country, to me, is criminal. I mean, there are federal laws when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to law enforcement, but not in school settings where these things are happening predominantly to children with disabilities, Black and brown children, kids with a trauma history, and really young kids. We're talking about 5 and 6-year-olds that are having this happen to them. So we're going to continue pushing to get better laws and policies, whether it's nationwide, state by state, in Canada, whatever we can do to try to make a difference here. Let me shift over to Amy. Would you like to share a little bit about your story?
Sure. Hi. Yeah. I started getting involved when my daughter, Alice, was restrained, actually first in Washington State when she was in preschool. She was only 3 years old. And the only reason she was restrained is because she wouldn't sit still for circle time. Mm. And it wasn't a typical restraint. It was, she was trapped between cube chairs. And they sent me a picture of it, like they sent like a craft for Father's Day with the puzzle pieces, which, that's a whole different thing. But that's how I found out. And I was just horrified. And they were very excited about it. Oh, look, we found a solution for her to sit. You could see her face. Because she couldn't move. She was just completely stuck. And so that was my first, I showed it to some therapists that she was working with at the time. And they said, no, that's mechanical restraint. And I was just absolutely horrified. So I think that was when I first started getting involved. And then I thought we would have a different experience moving across the country. And no, it got worse. We moved to Connecticut and she started kindergarten. First day of school, they started her on a token board just because she, just to get her to move, to get her to sit still in her chair. They said she could get up to move around if she sat still at her desk. And I said, throw that thing in the trash. Just throw it in the trash. You. And of course, they didn't like me right off the bat. And it was a very tense. I think we lasted 9 months, 8 months, 9 months in kindergarten. She and her twin brother. I pulled them out to homeschool. And then this past year, we had a lot of changes. And so I tried again because I really needed time to work. So I tried again to put them in school. The second day of school, I picked her up and she had bruises on her arm. They had already been upset because I sent her to school with her AAC device. And they didn't like that. I mean, they made me sign a form. Or no, they didn't make me sign anything, but they sent a form home a letter, an official letter from the school district saying that they gave me permission to use her personal device on the school grounds. It was an insurance issued AAC device, and they didn't even know what it was. And so I knew that there was a problem, but I had no idea it was that bad. And so when I picked her up from school, the para that was working with her, she has to have a one-on-one because she elopes. So the para that was working with her was snapping in her face to try to get her to look up. And I was just, that was already, I was so horrified. I couldn't even move. So I took them to McDonald's, it was like Friday. And then by the time I got them home, that's when I saw that she had bruises like a hand, like thumbprint. It was very obvious, thumbprint and little finger marks on the other side of her arm. And, of course it was a Friday. So I took pictures immediately, went completely crazy on the administration. They denied everything. All they did was assign her a different paraprofessional. The pediatrician that I took her to did call Department of Children and Families. They investigated while she wasn't at school, never called me, didn't talk to Alice. They just decided that since she bit herself into kindergarten when she was frustrated, that must be what the bruises are from, without ever actually looking at Alice. Just based on the teachers at the school. So so it happened again, and I was in a situation where I didn't have a choice but to keep sending her to school. About a month later, it happened to her brother, her twin brother. He came home with bruises, and he told me what happened. I called DCF myself. They investigated. They looked at video, which they didn't let me view. I said I wanted to see it. They wouldn't let me. And even the social worker who viewed the video said I couldn't view it, which doesn't make any sense to me. And then the last thing that happened was that my youngest child, who was in kindergarten, was, he was really getting upset because of everything that was happening with his siblings. So he was needing his kindergarten teacher, who was wonderful, to walk him to the door to meet me, pick up. Administration, I guess, was looking at the communication on the app, so they intervened. And when I went to pick him up, one of the administrators met me at the door and said, "We're trying to break him of this." Wouldn't let the teacher walk him to the door. He was standing in the hallway, completely frozen to the spot, terrified. Everyone was walking around him. He was crying. He didn't know what to do. They had Alice outside. Of course, she elopes. So the administrator said, "Well, if you want to go get him, you can. I'll stay here with her." I had to go pick him up while I'm disabled. I have a bad hip. He's a large child. I couldn't really pick him up. I had a hard time. I literally had to drag him outside, screaming, crying. So they just decided out of nowhere they were going to break him of the habit of needing some support. You don't talk about that way about a 5-year-old child who has disabilities. That's something you talk about. You talk about that way to about a dog. That was the last time I went on Get Campus because I just couldn't go back. I couldn't go back. I felt like a calculated attack on me and my family from this school district. I live in a very small town. The director of special education knows how I feel about ABA, and it felt really like they were trying to do as much as they could to show me that they were going to do ABA no matter what. And that I was not going to have my voice heard. My children were not going to have their voices heard, and they were going to do whatever they could to control them and me. So it wasn't long after that we stopped. And my son, Frankie, my older son, told them the day before he made the decision to stop. He said to them, I'm not going to be here past tomorrow because I'm not getting what I need here. 7 years old. I didn't know he was going to say that. But I'm very proud of him for being his own self-advocate. So that's how I got involved, because you don't do that to my children, and nobody should be doing it to anybody.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you mentioned your son as a self-advocate. And of course, Alice wrote an article with you and I shared the link to that in the chat as well. So, I think it runs in the family here. Being, and I think that's important. I mean, it's so critical that we stand up to systems that aren't working and we push for change. It doesn't happen if we're all compliant. We need the disruptors. We need to, we need to challenge what's happening in systems, and it's the only way we're going to see things get better.
Well, my mother worked in special education in the 60s and 70s, and she also had enough. When I was born, she stopped. She started teaching piano instead, and she sent me to school, but I ran home when I was 8 years old. I ran home and I'd had enough, and she started homeschooling me. So I think it's a generational issue that we have just bucking the system. So at some point, people are going to start listening, though.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and that's why we're here. That's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to, we're trying to change laws and policies. We're trying to bring better ways of doing things, and hopefully affect a positive change. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I'm going to shift up to Braden, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your story and kind of your, kind of what connected you here with the work that we're doing as well.
Sure. So I actually want to start by talking about a protest that I took part in back when I was at Princeton, and it was called the 7x9 protest. The reason it was called the 7x9 is because what we did, this was an anti-carceral group on campus. We had a space on a sidewalk that was 7 feet by 9 feet. It was marked off, and each person for a 24-hour period, I believe, occupied that space and didn't have any sort of human interaction for that time period. The reason we did that and the reason we chose those dimensions is because those are the dimensions of a solitary confinement cell in a prison. And one of the, I think that there is a significant analogy between the type of seclusion that unfortunately so many kids are subjected to, and the solitary confinement that is a very common practice in American prisons. And we know how traumatizing the solitary confinement is, and I see no reason to think why it wouldn't be even more so for people who are still who are still developing, still growing. There are quite a few differences between my experience and their experience. Number one, I chose to be there as a legal adult. Number two, I was not in an actual enclosed space. I was on a sidewalk that just happened to be marked off at those, where the confinement box ended. Number three, I had the wherewithal, as someone who had experience coping with neurodivergence and developing mechanisms of dealing with something like anxiety, which I have. I had the ability to do that. If I were, 15 years younger than I was then, I didn't make the choice to be there, and I was in an actual enclosed space, it would have been a totally different story to tell. And so that is a huge part of why I identify so strongly with what the Alliance does. I think that, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have been are familiar with the terms school to prison pipeline. I think that fundamentally the fact that these techniques of enforcing compliance exist in both of those environments, I don't think that I don't see that as coincidental. And so that's sort of just one of the one of the bases that really drives me to want to take part in this work. And I guess the other thing that I would say is I think that the strength of character that I see in so much of our AASR community, to be able to recognize that maybe we did perpetuate these things either in softer or harder, more or less explicit ways, and the ability to recognize that in ourselves and to try to take concrete action steps to counter that. I think that's kind of one of the most restorative things, and one of the most immense acts of courage that anybody could do. And so that's a part of the reason why I am proud to be engaged and happy to be speaking here.
Well, we're really excited to have you here, and of course, I know another part of your engagement here came from who I'm going to ask to come up next and speak, and that's Dr. Arielle Silverman, who I know you've known and been friends and whatnot with for quite some time. Thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm going to go ahead and transition over to Arielle.
All right, thank you so much, Guy. So I first learned about restraint and seclusion. I remember fairly clearly, it was about 7 years ago, and I was working on a book chapter for a book about ableism that one of my colleagues, Michelle Neriel Redmond, was writing. And I don't remember how I stumbled on it. I went down some research rabbit hole, and I was looking up something, and it led me to another source, and eventually I found a news article about restraint and seclusion and how prevalent it was. And it was from 2009. But of course, things, haven't changed appreciably or haven't changed enough since then. And I remember sharing the article on my Facebook page and saying, wow, this is absolutely horrific. And I was just in shock that so many kids would be subjected to these practices, especially by special education professionals who, supposedly should know better, who should be creating supportive and accommodating environments for these kids. Like, how could there be so many failures in special education? And then around that same time, I was working as a disabilities research and training consultant, and I realized that I needed to broaden my knowledge base. I knew, of course, a lot about blindness from growing up as a blind person. I had done my postdoc in a lab that studied the psychology of living with physical disabilities, but I didn't know that much about intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I started reading, and I found went down a few more rabbit holes of blogs written by autistic adults about behaviorism and ABA and masking and ableism against autistic people. And of course, a lot of practices like restraint and seclusion and other practices that attempt to get rid of autism, like making kids drink bleach or MMS solution or whatever. Like I learned about all that kind of stuff. And then in 2018, I started working for the PREETS program in Virginia. And so I had a few autistic students, probably 3 or 4 that I knew were, and probably some who weren't identified. And I started to learn from them. And there was one student in particular that I really connected with. And I remember very vividly that the first time he came to an event and, I introduced myself to him and met him. And that one of the first thoughts that I had when he walked away was, wow, this boy has been ABA'd. And not just that he's gone through ABA, but he has been ABA'd. I just got a low battery warning, so we'll see how this is going to work here.
Okay.
I'm going to turn off my camera and go up to the charger while I'm speaking. Like, continue to speak.
Okay, sounds good.
I apologize. So I met this student and I spent a lot of time working with him over the next year and a half while he was enrolled in the program. I spent a lot of time co-regulating with him. He would kind of seek me out to talk, and he would share a lot of his special interests with me. And he did an internship that was based around one of his special interests. And without, giving out a lot of private information about him, what I can say is that there were some people in his life who completely pathologized him and, labeled him with a bunch of acronyms and labeled him as being behaviorally challenging and, applied all these interventions that were based on behaviorism to him. And then, he was the exact same person, but in a different environments, like with me in my program and in some other environments, he, his strengths were able to shine through, and he had a completely different profile. And, this isn't really surprising when you think about the background that I have in social psychology, which preaches that everything is an interaction between a person and their environment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so important to remember with AASR, because, the same person can be labeled as dangerous, in need of restraint and seclusion in one setting, and then in a different setting just have none of those tendencies. So, I spent a lot of time talking to the student, and he told me a lot about, how his nervous system worked. And I learned that I had a lot of misconceptions about autism. And there were a lot of misconceptions out there. And I continued to correspond with him after he graduated when the pandemic started. And I don't know if he had ever been restrained and secluded. I do know that he had experienced some other traumatic things, that some of which were ongoing at the time that I was interacting with him. But he always would say, whenever we were in, group discussions or one-on-one, that he was going to change the world and he was going to make the world a better place, especially for young people. And he focused a lot on that. And he couldn't always verbalize, and he was speaking, but he couldn't always verbalize all of his thoughts, and he couldn't really tell me how he was going to make the world better. But that was a very clear, driver for the choices that he made in his life. But unfortunately, I don't think he really fully knew that it was okay, that he was okay the way he was, that it was okay to be autistic and to have other disabilities. About 3 years ago, this individual stopped returning my communication. I don't know where he is, and I don't know if he's safe. But I made a commitment that I would, work to, in his spirit, to try to make life better for people like him. Autistic people, other disabled people, people who have experienced trauma, and people who have had their rights and their autonomy violated. So that was one of the main kind of drivers for coming to AASR. I think I found AASR through Greg Santucci, some of his work. And I also incorporated a lot of what I learned from the student in writing my memoir, which I was actually working on during some of the times when I was communicating with him. And particularly the latter part of my book, for those of you who decide to join the book study, the final 4 chapters or so incorporate a lot of the things that I learned and some of the ideas that I was thinking through at the time.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. And I very much relate to your passion and around the changes that need to happen. Moving away from medical models of disability into social models, and how do we move away from compliance-based approaches that are unfortunately exceedingly common and result in a lot of harm. And really appreciate the work that you're continuing to do in this space, and really excited to have you as a volunteer. So let me take a quick little break here, and just, again, kind of in the spirit of mentioning some things coming up next year, I did want to mention something else here. We have kicked off today a seclusion and restraint survivor group. And what this is really intended to be is a safe place for individuals that have experienced restraint and seclusion. And we've limited this right now to individuals that are 18 or older. But individuals that have experienced restraint and seclusion, kind of a safe place to connect with others and to share resources and really to be part of a community. I know Courtney's putting in the chat a link to this, but if you're interested, you can sign up. It's going to be using Discord, and there's a sign up form that is linked here. But it's another one of the things that we're introducing in 2024 to really, again, try to do more to support really all the different individuals that are affected by this. We want to support individuals that have experienced this. We want to support families. We want to support educators. We want to do all we can to bring about change. So check that out if you get a chance. And I'm going to make that disappear. And I'm going to transition now into Frederick County, Maryland. And Frederick County, as many as you may know, was investigated by the Department of Justice over their use of seclusion and restraint. And I'm going to have Angie share a little bit about her story.
Thank you, Guy.
Thank you.
So I came about to this organization. Our story is a little bit unique because I have actually been through the entire legislative system, and my husband is a local politician. I may be going into the BOE next year myself. So my child, Thomas, my son, was placed into a special education program at a very young age. He was restrained and secluded hundreds of times throughout a 9-year span without my knowledge. The Department of Justice investigation came into our county, and that's what led to the findings of the incidents. Otherwise, they would have been hidden away in my son's educational file, possibly forever. When I found out my son Thomas was being secluded and restrained without my knowledge, he was 16 years old. He had not understood that his entire school life had contained abuse, as he has autism, and he thought his experience of being locked in a closet or held face down by staff was a normal school day for him. So when he read the article in the newspaper about the Department of Justice investigation, he came to us and said, "I'm glad they're finally doing something about this." And we were appalled because we were like, "Oh, we didn't know. Were they doing these things to you?" And he said, "Yes, all the time, and it felt like abuse." So that's why we started to dive into his educational file, and we found a lot of really distressful information. I had been extremely proactive in his school career since Thomas was very little. Starting in 2010, I was always researching the newest developments for autism, attending NIH workshops, attending IEPs, and asking lots of questions. And I also was looking for low-income resources because I was a newly single parent going through a divorce. So this was during a time frame when autism was really not as commonly known or even slightly accepted as it is today. I've had to overcome a lot of obstacles, and overall we did end up undergoing litigation with the public school system, and we did settle. However, Thomas and myself are still undergoing a lot of therapy from the trauma. the trauma that you experience as a parent when you have seen your child in distress at school and you think it's from a disability when it's actually the possibility from consistent abuse in the public school system, is it just changes you as a person. You feel guilt as a parent that you didn't protect your child. That can be really overwhelming. I have to constantly be working on myself in therapy to overcome this hardship on a daily basis. And even though it wasn't my fault, as parents, we all have this deep emotional instinct that tells us things would have been different if we made different choices in our child's education. And we have to live with that. And that's I think the toughest thing for parents. Guy has been a guiding light in all of this with this organization in stopping seclusion in the state of Maryland. They got that legislation passed. I still have a lot of parents locally that reach out to me as the expert, basically, in preparing yourself against the system, because you kind of have to put your mind in that context that you might hate these people that have harmed your child and you want to hurt them back, but it's not them, it's the system. It's the system overall that is at fault. And, you know, I'm always checking news on recent developments and finding more trauma and more obstacles for individuals, especially children in the system. And personally, I don't want to throw the system away, though. I just want to change it. You know, protecting kids against seclusion and restraint is just the beginning. The actual public school system nationally needs more funding and resources, and it needs more ideas from people like all on this panel and everywhere out there on how to make the system better and more inclusive for all children, and especially children, you know, that are, you know, of, I don't like saying black or brown children, but really, you know, it can be based on income, it can be based on a disability, and it can be based, you know, on race, unfortunately. It's really weird because I advocate a lot on this, and my brother, who is in California, John Pisano, he is at Star King to be a priest, but he really wants to work on therapy for prisoners and veterans, because prisoners actually undergo the same types of abuse that our children go through in the school system. So, you know, I have him working on one side and I'm working on another. This organization has been so helpful for me, even though I'm just in the beginning stages. And that these like efforts allow, like the efforts that I make to try to like help parents understand what is seclusion, what is restraint, what is illegal, and what you can do about it. You know, this organization helps me have a platform to help other people, because it's really tough when like someone emails me and, you know, or messages me and they need immediate help. I unfortunately just can't be like 20 places at once to help everybody. So, you know, that's why I like being able to be given a project here to help with the legislation and help try to get laws changed everywhere. Guy is so right about, and everyone here, about compliance. You know, the school system is all about compliance and making your child, do and say and act a certain way, when really we just need to be like accepting of people's differences, and we need to learn how to communicate with people with disabilities. We have to learn their communication. If you go to Japan, or another country, or Mexico or wherever, it's important to try to learn how to speak the language or learn the culture of where you're going. And when I think of people on the spectrum and other neurodiverse people, I like to think of that I am in their country and I need to learn how to communicate with them on their language, on their culture, in order to understand and help them succeed. It's really tough now because, my child is kind of pushed out of the system and is being pushed into being an adult when he is not really employable or cannot do secondary education. So that's why a lot of my efforts are going towards possibly the Board of Education and representing both sides, because it's not just children. I mean, teachers are getting reprimanded constantly, and special educators, there's no whistleblowing, protection for these people. And there needs to be. It needs to be changed. And the only way that really anyone can make change is to start small and work your way up. Yeah. So that's what I'm doing over here.
Well, yeah, Angie, I appreciate it, and appreciate all the things you're doing. I know how much you actually have been doing to support people, in your community across the state. We're glad to have you here with the Alliance and doing work to support, all the people kind of across the world that are experiencing this. I relate to so much of your story, and I'm glad to have you here with us. Why don't we get to Heathyr? You ended up on the other side of the starting line here, so you're going to wrap us up. And why don't you share a little bit about kind of your story and what brought you to the Alliance? And I know you share some things in common with a couple of the other folks that have spoken already, but why don't you share a bit about your story and your work?
Okay, well, if it hasn't been obvious as you're watching, I struggle with ADHD really bad, and my stress is out of control. So I started in residential, and when I worked at the first place, we restrained kids constantly, and I would see staff egging on the kids and egging on the conflict instead of doing what we were trained to do. I trained in therapeutic crisis intervention, which is kind of like CPI, but it's specifically made for residentials. And through that, you're trained how to de-escalate a situation that restraint. But staff would just argue with the kids and do things, so they had to put that kid in restraint. And as my time went on there, I was like, why are we doing this? What is the point of a restraint if we as staff are the ones causing it? And then I moved up a little bit in that organization, and I knew I wanted to be an advocate. So I went the social work route. I have my master's in social work, and I'm a licensed social worker. I work in therapy now. And I moved to an emergency shelter here in Northern Indiana. And while I was there, I've been writing their policies against using restraint, because to be accredited by their accreditation body, you have to have a 5-year plan of getting out of restraints and not using them. And I was perusing the Alliance website one day, and I found an article by Dr. Lori Desautel about trauma. And it was just such a great explanation of what trauma was and how it affects kids that we passed it around to every single staff member. And yeah, and I just started questioning restraints. And I remember one night I was the on-call admin, and they had just restrained a kid, and that kid had gone underneath the table, and they're like, do we need to restrain him again? They called me, and they're like, we're about to restrain him again. He's under the table and he won't come out. And I'm like, no, you're not. Just let him underneath the table. If you can see him, leave him alone, because he is trying to stay from all that stimulus and he is trying to regulate himself. Don't make things worse. Yeah. And that got me on my latest hyperfixation, which is sensory input, sensory processing, and occupational therapy. And I joined this organization because I want to help others. I want to help social workers, teachers. I'm a big believer in teaching kids to advocate for themselves and giving them a voice. And I also like to write. So I've written a couple articles, and I'm really nervous as a public speaker. So I feel like I'm rambling. But yeah, I joined because I believe kids need a voice. And I believe as an adult who works with kids, who works with teenagers, that I should be advocating for change in all systems for the children. Yeah,
absolutely. I really appreciate you and all the work you've been doing. And of course, your writing is a fantastic. And you mentioned your interest in kind of sensory, and you had done a presentation for us at one point and really brought some great information to our team. And I'm going to talk you into someday doing that for a larger audience, even if it's we'll pretend it's a private event, just you and I. And
I'm pretty sure you have me signed up for July.
All right. Good. I knew I was trying to get you on the schedule, so that's fantastic. But I really appreciate the work that you're doing. And all of you are doing things to make a difference, and I appreciate that. I want to, we've gone a little longer than usual, and I want to share a couple more quick announcements, and then we're going to wrap it up, and I'm going to give you each one final word, so you can be thinking about what your final word might be, and just to put some context in it, kind of as we move into 2024, what your hopes might be, whether personal or system change or whatever it may be. So with that, let me go ahead and give a couple more quick 2024 announcements and some other things here. One, I do want to encourage you to consider our end of year giving campaign. So we've got, I think Courtney will put the link in the chat as well, but we've got an end of year giving campaign, and would actually encourage you not only to consider giving, but maybe even sustain giving. You have the option to give kind of one-time or even monthly or quarterly contributions. We are a very small nonprofit, and it really helps to get support from the community to support the things that we're doing. So that was one thing I wanted to mention. Another thing I wanted to mention was we are trying to get 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, and we're getting ever so close. But if you happen to be on YouTube and have an account, if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, and of course there's a link there, AASR News/YouTube, where you can go to our website and find it as well. And you would subscribe, that would be a fantastic help for us. Another thing I wanted to mention here as we're getting through some of the announcements, as you've been listening to our volunteers, you might be thinking to yourself, I want to be part of it. I want to volunteer. I've had similar experiences, and I want to do something to help affect change. If you go to our website, there is a form there that you can fill out. If you're interested in being a volunteer, and you can tell us a little bit about who you are and your interests, and we'll have somebody reach back out to you, usually within a day or two. And you can just navigate our website under Take Action. There is a volunteer option. So feel free to click on that and learn how to become a volunteer. And with that, I want to go ahead and wrap us up. And to wrap us up, I just want everybody to take a kind of we'll do this as a lightning round here, kind of a quick final word. Anything, any final things you want to share? Or any hopes that you have as we go into the new year, would love to hear that. And Courtney, I'm going to go back to you as number one, because you are right beside me as I look at the squares of everybody here. So Courtney, what's your final word?
I just hope that this year we can get some federal legislation passed that can protect all kids in public school, private school, and help prevent restraint and seclusion from happening in the first place to kids.
Fantastic. And that won't happen without people standing up and caring. And what that looks like, and this isn't hard to do, but if you reach out to your federal representatives, you reach out to your congressional representative and your senator, and you tell them that you want them to support the Keeping All Students Safe Act. If you schedule a meeting to meet with staff from your senator or congressperson's office, this is something you can do. 6 years ago, that would have seemed like a foreign concept to me. I wouldn't have thought I could just call up my senator's office. But you know what? I have, and I've met with several senators' offices and congressional representatives, And that's how change happens. Change happens by us taking action. So great, Courtney. Braden, what are your final thoughts, hopes for 2024? Anything final you want to share with us?
Sure. So, couple things I'd like to get rid of in 2024, though it'll take longer, is I'd like to do away with grades because I don't do anything other than stress out both kid and adult learners. I'd also like to get rid of attendance awards. That would be good. As far as what I'm looking forward to, but a little bit more realistic, I'm looking forward to being one of the discussion facilitators on Arielle's book, which I want to recommend again to everybody. And I'm also looking forward to getting to know everyone on the team better as I start joining more projects. So thanks for having me on.
Fantastic, and appreciate you sharing your thoughts there. I'm going to put in the chat here a link to an article from someone who I respect quite a bit, and that's Alfie Cohen. Alfie Cohen has a fantastic article, which is the case against grades. Of course, he also talks about in his book, Punished by Rewards, the problems with rewards. Rewards and consequences are both ways of trying to manipulate people, manipulate behavior, and talks a lot about kind of what's wrong with that approach. All right, Amy, and Amy, I've got a note here that I saw you in a meeting before, and I just saw you again lift up a Diet Canada Dry Ginger Ale. And this is not an ad for Canada Dry Ginger Ale, but that's what I drink all the time, and I drink it so much that my kids buy me sometimes Canada Dry Diet Ginger Ale for Christmas. So when I saw that, I'm like, wait, I've got somebody else here. So anyway.
Yeah. Very popular in my house.
There you go. Okay. Well, what are your final words, thoughts for the future? Anything you want to share?
We need more access to communication in school. A lot of children who are autistic, especially who are autistic, but also other disabilities, need more access to communication, especially in my daughter's case, but it doesn't necessarily, in her case, it was an AAC, but it doesn't have to be an AAC device. Behaviors communication. A lot of children just need access to communication, need to understand. It's like Angie was saying, we have a different way of communicating. You need to understand us. You need to learn our language, whether it's our body language, our communication needs to be better understood, and we need to have more ways of accessing language. So I really hope that part of training and everything that's going to be available is going to include more AAC, more psychological studies on how autistic children and other children with other disabilities communicate, because that will definitely decrease what educators perceive as behavior issues and classroom disruptions that results in seclusion and restraint.
Yeah, great point. And of course, we know what the data shows, and the data shows that, of course, children with disabilities are far more likely to be restrained and secluded. If you break that data down, autistic children far more likely to be restrained and secluded. You look even further, non-speaking autistic children far more likely to be restrained and secluded. And so much of that can be avoided, so much of it. But when you begin to talk about having access to communication, access to communication is a human right. I'm sorry that Cass had tried to join us, and when I unfortunately wasn't able to stay on, but Cass has done some great work around toddler AAC.
Yes.
And of course, we work with other organizations like Communication First that does some amazing work around this as well. So I hear you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Heather, we're back to you, and you're not last this time. You're in the middle square.
What I hope.
Any final words or hopes?
I just had that moment where I knew what I was going to say and it left totally. My hopes for 2024 is to continue my advocacy and stress that we need to stop on kids, such as spoiled, bratty. I've been watching a lot of Christmas TikTok videos where kids, adults are like, well, I would take everything away. And I really want to get out there with emotional regulation. How adults were responsible for teaching emotional regulation, and on the other hand, we have to accept a child's emotions, especially around the holidays when everything is just sensory overload. And absolutely. I really want to finish and restart my book on how kids, children, especially those in foster care and the juvenile justice system, do not automatically owe you respect because you're an adult. These kids have attachment styles that have led them to believe that adults aren't safe people, and you just can't go demand respect.
Yeah, and experiences, right? So much is based on experience, and people often forget that. I mean, and in fact, even thinking about our nervous systems and how our nervous systems are affected by our experiences. So much there. Heather, thank you so much. And it sounds like in the meantime, before the book's done, a great topic for an article. So, you want to write more about that? We'd love to share more about your ideas. And speaking of articles, Karen, you've written a bunch of articles recently, and I love it. You wrote a really great article recently. I'm trying to remember what the title was. Is something about Taylor Swift being trauma informed. Yeah, great piece. What are your final thoughts and your hopes as we go into 2024?
I have two. I don't remember who it was now because I also blank out when I'm feeling nervous. So, but somebody talked about whistleblower protection, and I have never thought about that before, but I think that would be really, really important because I know that there are a lot of poorly trained and poorly motivated educators. And I know that there's a lot of educators like me who are trying to do better once we know better and constantly striving for something. And I have a lot of people that I think watched what I went through and thought like, well, I'm not gonna say anything. Like there's a lot of stuff that happened to me when I started speaking vocally about things. So and then the other one is just from an educator lens. I really just want to normalize saying the hard things out loud and being vulnerable and self-reflecting and growing from that, right? Like we're trying to teach kids that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to learn and grow. And then we're really resistant to saying all of the ways that all of the regrets that we have at the start of our careers as well. So I'm just, I don't know. I'm just trying to be someone that's like, it's okay to not be a perfect educator who's,
and it's all about knowing better and doing better, right?
Right.
This is not about coming from a place of judgment. It's not about, critiquing or criticizing people for what they've been often told to do. Right. It's how do we better support those people? And those are educators and paraprofessionals like we want to reach. We want to help support people that are somewhere in that transition, and we want them to hear your story. And I think of Brian Dollimer in Vermont and others that are doing really amazing work around reducing restraint and seclusion. Well, thank you for all you do. Chantelle, I see your phone has 6% battery, probably 5% battery now, and you're not going to be long for this world. So I'm going to have you go ahead and go next and leave us with your final thoughts here.
I think it was heating up and now it's decided to charge, so I might be okay. But I really just wanted to say, honestly, a lot like Karen was saying, please don't be afraid to speak up if you're in an environment where you see this happening, because although you may right now think it's the only way, it's not. There's definitely education out there and available. Like Guy mentioned, I'm doing the Self-Reg Foundation certificate program through the Merit Center. And if you just want to do some initial reading on self-reg, we did that book in one of our book studies last year as well, or this year, I guess. And Dr. Shanker joined us, and it's really profound knowledge to have, even to recognize. You could see, obviously, my nervous system is shot right now because I've been under an excessive amount of stress over all of this. And it affects me and it affects my behavior, my ability to communicate, how emotional I am. I mean, so every part of my body is affected by what we've gone through with this. So you have to remember these children are going through so much more than any of us know because we're not in there every day and every moment. None of us are, not the parents, not the teachers. So we don't know what's happening, with them at all points in time. And it's definitely a case of their nervous system being overwhelmed, various parts of their overall body being affected by the stress that they're under, or maybe in my daughter's case, she's 15, but developmentally she's more like a 3-year-old. I can't imagine how challenging that is in her day for her. And the fact that she's minimally speaking, it certainly relays in behaviors when she's stressed out. And I see it in myself as a result of the nervous system state I'm in, and how I might react. It has everything to do with us in the moment as well. So, doing a lot of learning about that, I think
Mm-hmm.
is really beneficial for educators, but please be the voice. Our children don't always have their own voice to speak out for what's happening to them. And even if they are a speaking child, you don't want to go home and tell your parents that you did something in your day that, required your teacher to lock you in a room. I can't imagine what child wants to admit that to their parents at home. So
well, and I would encourage people, and I would encourage people to join you in the book studies. You and the other amazing team members that we have that are doing
It's a great time. We have so much fun. We really do. It's not all serious, hardcore, like doom and gloom. It's a really good time feeling really supported and connected with other people who want to.
And finding a community of like-minded people that are there trying to bring about change. Arielle, I know you have dinner waiting for you. So I'll let you, if you're still there, share any final thoughts you have or hopes for 2024.
Yeah, I am still here. I guess my hope is that we can stop doing things that don't work, because restraint and seclusion, not only are they, problematic from a human rights perspective, but they actually don't work, and they actually make problems worse. And there's so many other things like corporal punishment or, honestly, punishment in general, reward systems, even things like grades. They don't actually improve performance. So I hope that we can move further in the direction of kind of evidence. And, I think the Lives in the Balance work, collaborative and proactive solutions, is extremely promising. It does work. It's evidence-based. It's spreading, its influence is spreading. And so I'm really excited to be a part of that process. And I'm looking forward to participating as the author in the January book study, and also planning to write a couple of articles for the website.
Fantastic. And we're really thrilled to have you part of the volunteer team here. Angie, you get the final word here.
Well, thanks, Guy. So I guess my wish for 2024 would be to really try to help people and change their mindset. Change their mindset about their approaches to special education children, and also, help parents and all of us. I wish for all of us to get healing, to heal from what has been going on with our children, and also to help our children heal. Those are my wishes, and I hope to be a part of that process, because overall, we are a young country and in the US, and we just don't have the resources, the financial resources, the education for paraprofessionals and special educators. We just don't have everything that we need for them to be successful and to help our children to be successful, because we have to all remember it takes a village. Yeah. It takes a village to raise children. And I don't want my child to be in a village where he is going to undergo abuses, and no one does. So we have to really try to change other people's minds and their mindset about this, so that we can make people more aware and we can try to prevent it.
Fantastic. Lot of great points there. And I love what you were saying about kind of taking a village. I've been thinking and reflecting a lot on education recently. And if you're an educator, especially if we're talking about elementary or even middle school education, if you think about brain development, your brains aren't completely developed when you're 25 or 30 years old. There's so much that's happening when a kid is, 6, 7, 8 years old. Your job as an educator is not just to teach topics or subjects. Your job is really about helping to raise human beings. And that's part of what is really important and needs a change in our education system. This is about really helping to raise tiny humans and there's so much potential there. I've really enjoyed this. This has actually been our longest ever AASR Live, but it's been a lot of fun, and I promised all of you that it would be fun, so I hope you enjoyed yourselves. I heard a little bit of nervousness. I hope it wasn't as bad as anybody thought. I appreciate all of you that have been tuned in for this. I know we've had a number of people that have been with us live. Of course, we encourage you, as always, to share these events with others. Share them. If you're a parent, share them with your educators. If you're educators, share them with your parents. Whoever you are, self-advocate, this is really for you. I look forward to all the things that we have coming in the coming year. There's a lot of big things on the radar for what we're trying to do, and appreciate the community that is there and supporting us. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. We're going to go ahead and close out. And those of you that are on panel, if you want to stick around for a second, you can. And otherwise, if you got to drop off, I understand. But thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing everybody again soon. We'll see you.
Thank you, everyone.